evening. Welcome both to our physical audience who come here today, and also a warm welcome to our online participants who can, of course, put your questions down on Slido, and Gavin will, I'll turn to Gavin at several moments to give him the opportunity of identifying and putting the questions on Slido that have most caught attention. It's wonderful to be here with Ottoline, Dame Ottoline Leyser, of course the Regius Professor of Botany at the University of Cambridge, with a very distinguished record as a plant scientist, but also having stood down as Chief Executive of UKRI. And I had the pleasure indeed of serving on the board for a long time, overlapping with Ottoline as CEO. So I think this is one of the rare opportunities to hear from Ottoline with her reflections on UKRI. I think she's given evidence to the Commons Science and Technology Committee and maybe giving evidence to the Lords Committee. But I know she wants to get on with other projects rather than be tied down in frequent reflections on UKRI and its future. So we're very lucky to have Ottoline, and I like the smile, I hope in a slightly mischievous mood. So it's great that we've got Ottoline with us this evening to reflect as an event of ours here at the Foundation. Let me start with some sort of general question. And the aim is that Ottoline and I will talk for a while, and then, of course, we'll turn to you guys. You can put your questions, and we'll have some online questions. But first of all, Ottoline, kind of, how did your experience of UKRI compare with your expectations? You'd seen a bit of it from when you were running the Sainsbury labs, and I remember our meeting then when you were running that lab with great skill. So then you turn up at UKRI. What were you expecting? What was it like?
Gosh. So I'd had a lot to do, particularly with the BBSRC before that. I was also involved in the nurse review that led to the establishment of UKRI. I was on Nurse Paul's kind of committee that worked on that. And I thought it was an incredibly important project that actually is, I think, transformative for research and innovation in the UK at a time when having 9 separate councils really doesn't make much sense, when the opportunity is for join-up. And join-up is, I think, absolutely critical for getting the benefits out of research and innovation that we need. So a huge commitment to the project, and I suppose partly I applied for the job because at the time it was a relatively new organisation, and there were still a lot of people who were very naysay and complainy, and quite a lot of those people were, folded arms complainers rather than step in and do something about it complainers, which I thought was not acceptable. So if it isn't working for people, you've got to do something about it. And it was a new organisation, and a lot of the issues were straightforward new organisation issues, and I knew that there was a lot of kind of culture change needed, given its 9 things come together, only some of which actually wanted to be part of UKRI at the time. And on top of that, there's all the usual new organisation stuff. I think, in terms of surprises when I got there, I was less prepared for the immense amount of time it would take to do things like replace this ERP system, and those kind of classic IT things that you need when you're integrating 9 organisations in the public sector. Well, anyway, take a long time, and so I was less prepared for that part than for the creating a team of people who really wanted to work together to deliver, and that part is what I joined for.
And you mentioned the Nurse Review and the research councils. So your experience of bringing the different research councils together, reflect on that. What do you think there is a future for the individual research councils? Do you think they will gradually disappear into a single integrated entity, or do you think they'll have a long-term future, and if so, doing what?
So I think disciplines exist. My research has been very interdisciplinary for quite a long time, and we've talked a lot about interdisciplinary research. It's something that matters to me a lot, but it is interdisciplinary. I mean, there are disciplines, they exist. Maths is not the same as history, and so I think there will always be a place for defined councils whose job it is to look after disciplines. However, the power of all disciplines is massively amplified if they very easily can work together, either for the benefit of their own disciplines, because you need the skills of discipline A to support discipline B, or because there are things you cannot possibly address through only one discipline. So the power of UKRI is you have those strong disciplinary anchors and the communities and the relationships in a context where it should be super easy to work in different permutations and combinations, whether that's through kind of bottom-up driven collaboration or through top-down driven kind of challenge-oriented activity. And so I think there need to continue to be councils, and there needs to be very easy ways for councils to collaborate and for activity to happen truly jointly. And that was a shift that happened over the time I was there, in that, through successive spending reviews, the executive committee, which is the executive chairs of those 9 councils, plus me and some important, the CFO, those kinds of people, were voting for keeping money centrally to work in that collaborative way and for working much more collaboratively and collectively across all of them. So it's not a tension, it's not councils or something else, it's councils thriving through working collectively.
And I must say, Ottoline, having seen you close up working as Chief Executive, I think that you displayed great skill in promoting interdisciplinarity, and I think probably people trusted you with that agenda, and that in turn enabled you to promote it more effectively than might otherwise have been possible. I think that was something you achieved. And looking back, what are the highlights of your time? What are the things in your record that you are proudest of, and what are the moments that stick in your memory?
Gosh. I do think the organisation grew in a way that allowed it to deliver a lot of those kind of collaborative benefits, and I do feel very proud of that and very excited about that and the potential for that in the future. The interdisciplinarity is one of the things. There's now, a specific interdisciplinary scheme. The way we've worked to support people, I think that's really important, the kind of PhD student evolution to ensure that all the students being, across the whole piece have high quality training and research experience and so on and so forth. Things like the Future Leader Fellowship Scheme, which was up and running, long before I got there, but that's another, really flagship enterprise that can only happen because of the collective. But also, there's still brilliant stuff happening in each individual council, and it's amplified by the fact that it's part of that whole. And that's, I think, one of the things that continues to be an opportunity is for the communication across the organisation to be so kind of seamless that everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and so everybody can continuously tune their thing to adapt to the fact that somebody else is doing something cognate over there. It's a very exciting organisation that I think is I hope Ian will have a wonderful time with the fertile soil that is there.
Now, we've talked about, you call them the 9 councils. We might just pause on councils 8 and 9, if you like. As well, let's think first about Innovate UK.
Yep.
And as you know, going right back to the original legislation, there's always been a debate, does Innovate UK fit into UKRI? Should Innovate UK have a separate independent role? How does Innovate UK fit in, do you think?
So I think it's absolutely critical that Innovate UK is part of UKRI, because part of that join-up job that is so essential is joining up the kind of business-led innovation and a research with the other stuff. The way I've always seen it, I suppose, is that there are kind of discipline-focused councils of the 7, and then there are sector-focused councils. So Research England is obviously university-focused, Innovate UK is business-focused. They are sector-agnostic, but they are discipline-agnostic, but sector-focused. And then the research councils are the other way around. They are discipline-focused, but sector-agnostic. So they fund stuff in primarily in universities, but also, you know, they fully own a whole bunch of institutes, and on top of that, they are working very closely with business. And so I think that kind of horizontal vertical match is really important for getting the full tapestry woven together. And it is absolutely true that helping that to happen when you've got organisations like Innovate that were very separate and different and hadn't been working across the 7 as had been going on previously before UKRI. It's taken longer to get to the point where we're really benefiting from those interactions, but it's happening, and I think that's also very exciting.
And what about the practicalities of that? Because, and I know it's a very difficult judgment to make sometimes. To what extent, when different organisations, say a classic research council and Innovate UK, are doing things differently, that's just a sort of tiresome feature that can gradually be eliminated, or whether it reflects an underlying difference in the way they should function. Things like grant conditions, grant monitoring, timescales, follow-up. Innovate UK has tended to do those type of things differently from research councils. Did you think that those sorts of differences were understandable and benign, or would you look forward to a time when they are more closely aligned? So
I think actually there's quite a lot of difference between the research councils as well. So I think the idea that you know, this one outlier is not.
Historians and physicists tend to get grants.
And I think everybody can learn from everybody else in terms of good practice, and that's something else that evolved gradually over the time I was there. We did this big review of peer review, and are now working very hard to ensure that all of the good things that have been learned in the various parts of the organisation over the years can be spread and deployed, because different grant system, calls have different purposes, and you absolutely need to run those differently to deliver those different purposes. And then, of course, where there is a big difference with Innovate is that they're in a very different legislative framework with competition controls and all of those kinds of things that need to be taken into account. So they will always be different, but I don't think that's a problem. And there is no sense in which it's necessary to make them all the same. Even then, though, I do think you benefit from the diversity because people learn from one another what works and why.
Good. Let's dwell now briefly, or maybe it's so tricky it may be a little bit longer, the other entity, the other sector in your account, universities and Research England, where the financial pressures are intense. And there's also been debates about exactly how REF funding should be allocated and things like that. And there was quite a lot of controversy about the proposals for the new REF, the next round of the REF. How do universities fit into all this? Are universities, Nurse 2 was about how we should fund labs that aren't necessarily part of universities, if anything, a bit of a rebalancing away from universities. Not much increase in research funding for universities via Research England. And as we know, if you look at the count of accounting figures, the deficit for higher education on research is over 5 billion, whereas the deficit on teaching is just under 2 billion. So do you worry about the state of research in the universities, and do you think that the new REF can help address that in any way?
Gosh, that's a huge and complex question. So I think the first thing to say is that UKRI absolutely has a particular responsibility for the research base in universities. But, or rather, and it's important to point out that, it does also include Innovate UK, which is business-led, and many of the councils fully own and even more fully fund or provide core funding to a very large number of those institutes. There's 50 different institutes that UKRI support. So the proportion of the overall UKRI budget that goes into universities is not as infinite as people think.
50 different non-university based institutes.
Yeah. They have this very different governance arrangement. So some of them are in universities, but anyway. It's complicated, but some of them are.
Yes, some of them here. Yes,
in the Antarctic. So not in the university. So so that, and then yes. University research finances. So I don't think it is correct to say that there is a deficit in university research funding. What is happening is universities, which are independent organisations, are choosing to spend the income that they generate in a variety of ways on research, which is fantastic. So that's, great that universities have decided that they want to take 5 billion of their own money and spend it on research. The problem is that the source of income, that source of income is unstable, and in the context of the real financial challenges that universities are facing, their ability to spend that money on research is obviously undermined, and so there is less money to spend on research. But I don't like the deficit notion because it sort of comes with this tacit implication that therefore this 5 billion should be miraculously found from somewhere else to put into that. And I think universities have made choices, and they've made choices which are, wonderful choices for the UK, but it's not some fairy godmother's responsibility to fix those when the situation is different. I think that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that where I think the system has a much stronger role to play is that the incentives that have led to some of those decisions, I think, are not helpful. There's a complex web of incentives that influence how universities choose to act that are quite often in conflict with one another. And I think the REF has contributed to that. One of my main concerns is the volume incentives. So the REF pays money into universities, the way the money follows the REF assessment, according to the number of principal investigators or whatever you have. And so that means it makes sense for universities to have more and more and more and more of those kinds of people, and fewer and fewer and fewer of the people who support those people to do fabulous research. And that creates all kinds of problems, not least you now have a very large number of people who are in a system which at an individual level incentivizes them to write grants. So you've now got a very large number of people writing grants, bidding into a pot of money that hasn't grown in proportion. That's a lot of time and effort spent with people writing grants that don't get funded. And then they are working in a system where everything's stretched too thinly. So I think, doing less better is important. And that doesn't mean that all of these people are doing bad research or the wrong research or whatever. But there just isn't the amount of money to do research, that much research. And we've got to find a good way to consolidate and make sensible choices that are that require, I think, the other big incentive change, which is competition between universities, needs to flip into collaboration and cooperation between universities. So a number of these incentives have to go away. The volume one has to go away, the inter-university competition has to go away, and the incentives on individuals to have individual grants that are just for them has got to go away. And if you can take those things away, you can create an environment in which financial sustainability in the system is more achievable.
Let's follow up on that. So one much cruder way of putting this than you have in a typically sophisticated way is saying, what the hell are vice-chancellors doing, allowing people to apply for research grants where they will end up, even if they succeed, with 70% funding, and the other 30% has to come from their university budget that is heading into deficit. I mean, you're right, the 5 billion deficit is not visible in cash terms, but nevertheless, actually these research grants in total are putting a massive burden on them. Why can't this be gripped by university managers? And if they won't grip it, there has to be some external instruction on them to grip it, because the number of bids and the number of bids is excessive, and even the successful bids are creating problems.
Yeah, I should say, I mean, the UKRI in principle pays 80% of full economic costs. The calculation is it's only 70% for a variety of reasons, not least because people don't ask for the full economic cost. But it is worth pointing out that Research England is a quarter of the UKRI budget, and that's block grants into English universities with equivalent income streams in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. That in the English universities is 64p to the pound. So that notion that the 20% or even the 30% of full economic costs is a sort of gap, in principle is not the case, because there's QR. But in practice, the gap has emerged because of the very large number of grants that go in not only to UKRI but also to a variety of charitable funders, and so that overhead cost is high. And indeed, vice chancellors and indeed the whole system ought to be cutting its cloth to fit its budget, and it is not. And you could say that's terrible. Vice chancellor should have done something different. However, where I let them off is those other incentives. So if you're simultaneously incentivized to have more and more and more of those PIs, because that's how you get more QR, then you can't hire all of those people and then tell them they can't do any research, particularly if you're only promoting them if they're doing lots of research and getting their own personal grant to do that. So that second one, the vice-chancellors also have some significant influence over. That's where a lot of what I think universities should be doing is thinking much harder about their recognition and reward systems so that they align better with the behaviours that we actually need, which includes those collaborative things and so on and so forth that I've talked about. But I think where we can support financial sustainability in the system is to ensure that the REF incentives don't in any way reward volume over strategic focus, I guess.
And do you? Well, there's several other questions following off that. What you say about volume, of course, another feature of the redesign of the REF, led by you and Jessica Corn and others, is valuing the team rather than the individual star researcher. And part of the cultural shift you were trying to get was to recognise that a lot of science and research now is a team sport. And I remember just anecdotally conversations with researchers who would accept that they'd done well in the REF, but the software engineer who'd helped with all the compute work that was necessary wasn't recognised in the REF, and the university were now proposing to economise by getting rid of the very person who they felt had been part of their research success. But of course it did prove controversial. And how do you see, and it is a big change from a star system of research excellence and measurement. How do you see that debate playing out now, and what will the final version of the REF look like with those pressures being reassessed?
So, obviously I have no idea what the final version will look like. I should say that the REF is inherently a collaboration between Research England and the devolved funding bodies.
Yeah.
So it's actually technically not a UKRI responsibility. But of course, it fits into the wider UKRI system, and that's important. And I think more generally, valuing the full range of people necessary for the research endeavour is absolutely critical for the long-term sustainability of the system. And I find it interesting how difficult the notion of valuing the team and the system, the full set of people you need, has been as a concept, and that somehow or other that kind of plays against the notion of excellence, and which you only envisage as the kind of fancy shiny star person. It just doesn't make any sense to me that those things are somehow incompatible. It's not in any way denying that there are brilliant individuals coming up with brilliant ideas, but those people can't do a damn thing without everything else.
But meanwhile, there's a brutal competition out there on citations and citation indices and all that, and where names and references to names are counted.
So the papers have many authors, and the senior author is the person who is being counted in that way, and the other authors are undervalued, in my opinion. But also, it's very clear that, everybody knows that those kinds of metrics, whilst they're very useful, it's not that they have no information, they don't actually carry the information that people would like them to do. They're not a straightforward, objective measure of how good the research is. They're not a replacement for understanding what you need in the system. And I think, viewing the whole thing like some sport, like an Olympic, like the 100-meter sprint, who's the fastest person, that's easy. The person who crosses the line at the end in the shortest time, they've won, they were faster than the other people. Science is not like that. There isn't a defined winner, because the questions are all different and all over the place. There isn't even a single activity that you're trying to win at. You're trying to, find out stuff, but you're also trying to make stuff better. And what the important stuff is, who knows? And you want to do it for the immediate problems, but also for the problems that we haven't even thought of yet. And so you cannot run it like the 100 meters. You've got to have a much more sophisticated and eclectic way of thinking about what success is like and what you value and recognize and reward. And that is really important, including for those star people, because it's no fun working in a system that recognizes and rewards such a limited range of things. And those people have a very hard time in thinking that their worth is only, as good as their next fancy publication. It's not what it's about.
Of course, we're having this conversation in the week where each day we're hearing of a maximum of three individuals winning a Nobel Prize. And in a way, what you're engaging with is a much wider debate, which is getting live one in the science community.
Totally.
About what constitutes great science.
The Nobel Prize debate, it's a really interesting question, because it's quite clear, really, that system is not functional. And it is simply not the case that any of those brilliant discoveries being celebrated can properly be attributed to those three people and not an awful range of other people. And the notion that it's only three, everybody knows it doesn't really make sense. Should you, how do you move forward on that? Everything turns into the Nobel Peace Prize, where you can have any set of people. Should you not have the prize awarded to individuals at all, but have it awarded for discovery? Mm-hmm. This is the breakthrough discovery. Anyone who's contributed to that can feel happy, and the money can go to, I don't know.
There were supposed to be 1,000 names on the paper actually confirming the existence of the Higgs boson.
All kinds of things like that, yeah.
These are deep questions, which you might come back to in Q&A. But meanwhile, just a few other issues on UKRI I'd love to press you on. First of all, of course, you were dealing with politicians.
Indeed.
Strange group with their own distinct requirement. And The Haldane principle was, of course, classically formulated to protect rigorous assessment of merits of research grants from political interference. How do you find it dealing with politicians? And of course, actually, the Haldane principle, inspected close up, is it's got some grey edges. Deciding on big capital projects is a legitimate matter, ultimately, on which ministers can certainly take final decisions on advice. I mean, how do you think the Haldane principle is shaping up in the political realities, especially of more limited funding?
Yes, so Haldane, I mean, the principle is actually, a lot of academics would like the Haldane principle to be, give me lots of money and let me get on with it. And that's actually not what the principle says. The principle says that it shouldn't be the politicians who decide who gets the money, because you need expertise to understand, where the money should go in order to deliver a particular outcome. And it is completely legitimate for the elected government to say what outcomes should be the priority, whether there should be an industrial strategy with particular priority areas, the 8 great technologies, or whatever it might be. So I think that's fine, and I think that having that relationship between ministers, and one of the benefits of UKRI is it's a big organisation that brings together all of those parts, and is the interface with government there is an opportunity to build strong relationship that allows that to work better, to provide confidence that the outcomes ministers want are being delivered through the high quality process of funding allocation that UKRI can mediate.
It can get difficult close up. I mean, for example, funding for centres for doctoral training, which is where these kind of issues, where the rubber hits the road. To what extent can UKRI be the custodian of an overall ecosystem? And to what extent, at the other extreme, can it say there are some clear priority technologies and areas and resources are limited, so this year and the next few years CDTs are going to be in the following areas and no others? Those are kind of where these issues become real. How did you find those type of conversations with departments on priorities?
So it's an interesting question in that almost the whole job of UKRI is about tensioning priorities and articulating the opportunity costs for the solution that you come up with. With PhD students, actually, I mean, the way that has worked out is very clear, actually. There are 2 sorts of doctoral award. There are the what are now called focal awards, which are on particular areas, but there are also landscape awards, which are about protecting the health of the discipline, and they're more general. So you've got that landscape award foundation on which you can then build your different specialist input on whatever it might be and whatever the priorities are. But even amongst the priorities, there are always tensions. And in some ways where it's most difficult is when it's different departments in cross-government who want different things. And if you say, yes, we're going to have a nuclear science CDT, then the environmental science CDT that the DEFRA want, I mean, you're tensioning actually ministers against one another, rather not ministers against a particular system, and that's not straightforward.
That is the closest Alton's got to an account of dealing with politicians and ministers. We've talked about that. There are other areas of tension, and one, of course, is place, geographical distribution, and linked to that, the endless argument about the extent to which, when you look at where the great grant-receiving universities are, there's obviously a small number that get a large amount, and then endless agonizing, should other universities get any, or should they get more? How did you, what are the lessons you learned from the geographic pressures and the distribution across different universities, which often has a geographic element with the Golden Triangle in the southeast. How do you manage those pressures?
Yes, so place has been quite a high priority for quite a long time, and it started off as a debate where people were trying to sort of tension place against excellence, which I thought was a really insidious and unhelpful and inappropriate way to talk about it. And actually that comes back to this question of diversity and collaboration, I think. We have accidentally embedded a system where universities are competing against one another, against a very narrow set of criteria that drives homogenization between them. They're all trying to run the 100 meters when actually it's track and field. And different universities should be focusing more on it. There should be more diversity, and that diversity would also require collaboration so that you've covered the basis across the thing. And that would inherently make this question of place, and certainly the place excellence thing, a much more sensible and sophisticated conversation, because it's not about everybody trying to do the same thing, and over time, particularly universities win because they get bigger and concentrate up, but rather the very fact that you've got a small specialist institution in the north should be that's a great USP for that institution in a way that should allow it to compete.
And when you look, oddly enough, this might be an area where Scotland is ahead of us. Certainly, because of its size, it seemed to be able to create coherent groupings, thinking about physics as a discipline and capital investment for physics across Scottish universities. I don't know if it was ever tackled, but I believe it's still the case that groups like N8 can't receive a grant as a group. I think the checks have to be written to individual universities. Do you wish you could have done, do you regard those kind of groupings, which are often regional groupings, helpful? And can they in turn then take some of these decisions about who specialises best in which area?
I think there are lots of opportunities for those kinds of things, and I agree. I think all the devolves have done a better job of thinking about the ecosystem of higher education institutions that they have and how they should work together. And I think that there is actually an opportunity to do that in England and I know that that's a conversation that's going on now in the context of the university financial crisis. What are universities for? And therefore, how do you incentivize those appropriate behaviours? And I do think, thinking about groupings would be a good idea. One of the things I really enjoyed doing was visiting cities quite often, which had a small number of very different institutions, and in a lot of them they were working brilliantly together in a way that really supported the local innovation ecosystem, because you've got a big research intensive university, but also a more post-92 that is very vocationally focused and providing then highly skilled people to work in local industries that are also benefiting from. You really can build that in a very powerful way if there was more opportunity for an incentive for collaboration between institutions.
Yeah, there is some very interesting economic analysis that shows cities with that kind of two university model, where they've got a distinct set of their roles, Sheffield and Sheffield Hallam, whatever, is particularly good for the civic economy. One final question, and then we will open it up more widely, but we should touch on AI, what AI means for research, with both incredible potential that people such as Demis Hassabis will talk about, but also nightmare scenarios where generative AI producing everybody's research grant application could mean that research applications go the way of the jobs market. So just you've obviously thought about this, and I know you've been very interested and we're personally engaged in the sort of research integrity debate. Just finally reflect on those type of trends changing the character of research in the future.
Gosh, AI is going to change everything. It is changing everything. And there's a huge opportunity to do research differently because of AI. And using AI as a research tool in all kinds of ways. That's one whole area which is very exciting. I was talking this morning about genomics and how you could use AI to help bridge the genotype-phenotype gap and all that kind of stuff. Those kinds of things are very exciting. Then, of course, there is how you use AI, generative AI to write your grant for you. It's interesting in that so UKRI established signed up to the principle that you should not use AI to referee a grant proposal for all kinds of reasons, not least it's a confidential document you can't put out there, but also what we're asking for is people's expert opinion on the thing. I don't want the AI opinion, I want the opinion of the person whom I've invited to provide that. Using AI to write the grant is a whole different deal. At some level, to improve your English and make it easy to understand and so on, what's the problem? I think that's fine. At what point it will be able to actually come up with a sensible experimental set of experimental tests that is better than the one you could think of? Well, that becomes a very interesting question. I mean, maybe that's also fine, because what we're interested in is solving the problem, not whether it was Bill Smith who did it. We're interested in people understanding how the world works so that they can make it a better place.
That is the sort of note, it's a very good note on which to end this part of the evening, because you're fundamentally very, if I may say so, very principled and also very optimistic about the power still of science to tackle the world's problems. And I think we should record that was the spirit in which you approached the role in your time as Chief Executive of UKRI. Now, we've got another 45 minutes or so. There will be online questions, and Gavin, I'm going to turn to Gavin in a little while to get some of those, but also people here. Now is your moment to put your questions to Ottoline. If you can give your name and organisation, that would be fantastic. We've got a roving mic, so do put up your hands if you've got some questions. Let's start. I see two hands up at the very back. Why don't we take those two interventions in a group? Those two at the very back, yeah.
Thanks. Hi, Claire Thorne, FSD Council and Deep Science Ventures. Ottoline, do you feel like we should, as a country, we should feel confident in the structures and the mechanisms that we have to be able to, one, diversify the research talent pool, and two, grow it at the pace and with the urgency that we need?
Right, and do you mind passing the microphone on? Yep.
Thank you. Andrew Mackenzie from the Physiological Society. What's your view of UKRI's role in future workforce planning in the R&D sector in the UK?
Yes, slightly related questions. Diversity, workplace planning.
They go very well together. Yes. So, interesting that you asked, do I still have confidence in? Because I actually don't think the mechanisms have ever been very good at that. And one of the things I was trying to do was make them better at that. It gets a little bit back to the narrow criteria that we now value, and the way, it's something that's happened over years, the years that I've been working in science, which is, in many ways is motivated in a positive way. It's motivated by trying to be fair and all the rest of it. But it does come back to relying on metrics that don't capture what you actually want to capture. And they trap people into this very narrow notion of what a research career looks like. And that actually also segregates the different parts of the research system and stops adoption and diffusion. We're very siloed, and a lot of the reason we're siloed is because we've gone with these very narrow assessment criteria. And to me, diversifying the system is about diversifying the assessment criteria, which is why UKRI now has these narrative CVs that accepts a much wider range of things to evidence that you're an appropriate person to deliver a particular research project that isn't, have I published lots of papers and have I had lots of previous research grants? Because there are many ways you can evidence that. And that, to me, is fundamental to the long-term success and stability of the system is being much more sophisticated in how we support people to move about across the system. And unless we can do that, I think we will continue to struggle with a system that is brilliant at different bits of it, but rubbish at connecting them up, which we know is a real challenge in our system. So it's not just about, who's doing research, it's about the diversity of the research that we do and the diversity of the career paths that people follow through the research system, that we need to have criteria, assessment criteria that properly ensure that we can support that diversity. And it is different. It's difficult because precisely because of this 100 meters analogy. It's very easy to know who's the fastest. What we're interested in is having very different people doing different things in the system in a way that is nonetheless fair, and we can share out the money in a way that is a fair competition. And you need to have criteria that are able to do that. And I think things like those narrative CVs really support that kind of shift. And then that maps very well onto this notion of the workforce of the future. And I think fundamentally we have absolutely no idea what we're going to need in the future because things are changing so fast, and you can guess, but actually it's probably quite dangerous to guess. And a much more sustainable approach is to recognize that things will keep changing and that the people we need have to be able to cope and adapt with those kinds of changes. And again, if we are thinking about much more dynamic, diverse careers, then I think that will help us with whatever workforce we need in the future, and with the notion of lifelong training and adaptation that I think all of us are going to need to feel comfortable with.
Can I follow up on that, actually, which is just on overseas researchers? Mm-hmm. And of course, during your time, the visa costs and the associated costs, the NHS contribution and everything, so you're thinking of a family moving to the UK, they grew.
Yeah.
And at the end of your time, there was the beginning of the debate about should we try to attract researchers or even whole groups of researchers from the US? Or would it be more tactful to think of ourselves as attracting researchers who would otherwise have gone to the US? Yeah. Where do you see the role of researchers from overseas in your account? And what more should we be doing to attract them to the UK?
So, I mean, research is an incredibly international endeavour, and it absolutely involves people moving. And I think the UK has a very strong research system, and one of the things that has helped it stay at the forefront is the freedom people have in quite a lot of parts of the system to pursue the research questions that they want to. And one of the reasons why the financial challenges in universities are such an issue is that we're in danger of losing the opportunity for people to come here and do that, whoever they are and wherever they go. So actually the quality of the research environment and the research culture that supports that freedom is key, and that includes having all of the people around you that you need to help with that. So I think overseas, I don't even really sort of think of it in terms of can we get people from overseas here? I think of it more in terms of can we have the most vibrant, exciting research and innovation system here, and then people will obviously come. We need to make it easy for them to come. And so, I think the visa fees are a real challenge. But to make the UK super attractive, it's about the whole system.
And you certainly did find, just when you were visiting a lab or a university institute and seeing younger people there from Italy or Germany and ask them why they were in the UK, they would talk about the baronial professorial system in some of those countries and the greater capacity, especially for a younger researcher, to bid for their own research grants and shape their own research program rather than having 20 years working for the professor's program first. And I've lost contact with them. I used to track the age distribution of people getting PI grants, and it was always good to see a slug of people in their 30s. Do you think that strength of the British system is being maintained? Have we got one of the arguments, even one of the sceptical generational issues about peer review was whether the peers were often your own age group of peers who understood the problems that your peer group had faced in a discipline that they'd begun in 20 or 30 years ago. Do you think that kind of age mix is still being delivered?
So I think, yes, I mean, the UKRI grant portfolio, the age distribution of the PIs is quite good, particularly relative to some other countries. I think, where I think it would be, I mean, who is acting as a peer reviewer, but also who is on the peer review panels. I think it's really important to have younger people on those panels, and that's something that is not always, There's some kind of idea that being old somewhere or other gives you a gravitas that allows you to be on those panels, which I don't believe. I think you just need people who are open-minded and,
And you can have some influence on that kind of thing, and including in who sits on ref assessments and all that kind of thing. You can help shape that. UKRI.
Yes, absolutely.
Are there some questions on this side? Yes, I see the gentleman with his arm up. It might be Graham Reed. Is it Graham? Over to you, Graham.
Thank you.
Identify
Thank
yourself.
you,
And then pass it on to there's a second gentleman just near the masturbate. Graham first.
Ottoline, how would you characterise the relationship between UKRI and other government departments? And I'm thinking both of those departments that have a history of funding research and those departments that have an appetite for the evidence that comes from the research base.
Thank you. And again, let's collect a second question. Let's pass that on. Yeah.
Thanks, Lord Will. It's Michael Hill-King here from Huawei. Sorry, the beard's confused you. Dame Ottoline, you mentioned that disciplines exist, and you also mentioned that universities make choices and they're free to do so. You've probably studied the report that came out of the Institute of Physics recently saying that a quarter of physics departments were at threat of closure. Who should be bothered by that?
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Yeah.
So other government departments and university diversity, again, at some level. So, yes, so I think one of the great strengths of the creation of UKRI is it built the opportunity for it to be easier for people across government to interact with the research system. And that's something that, again, kind of grew over the time I was doing the role, and I think there's still opportunities for it to go further. Quite a lot of departments had relationships with councils before, and it took some time to work out how to make those relationships in the new context work even better. And I think I was really quite excited with how some of those things developed, to the point that there was a lot of examples then of co-investment where departments were putting some of their research money in with UKRI money to do particular projects, or just manage programs where UKRI ran the research activity on behalf of the department. All of those things I think are useful ways to join the system up, so that it's not just lots of departments doing their own independent thing without any idea what anybody else is doing, and so on and so forth. And the other really interesting thing, which was just getting off the ground as I stepped down, is Patrick Valence was absolutely committed to research activity associated with the missions, and really trying to generate a very close link between the mission boards identifying real blockers to the delivery of those missions that could be fixed with research, getting a research activity that addressed those, and then feeding it directly back in so that the outcomes were adopted instantly. I mean, so they had to have the work funded under that program had to have a pull-through kind of implementation plan that went with it. So really creating that full loop where the research activity that a department or a mission or a government needs, there's a reflex to ask for a research-based solution that is then instantly adopted in a positive cycle. That is a very exciting development, and again, I think because we have UKRI, it's plausible to do, and I really hope that works. Beyond that, there's all the great work that ESRC did on supporting departments to develop their areas of research interest in a much more addressable and engageable way. So in the same way, I think that we need we need the high productivity businesses in our economy. We also need super high productivity public services and really effective policy making. And all of those things are research and innovation driven. And getting those interfaces working really well and the connections across the communities deeply embedded so that it just flows, that's key. And again,
is the area of research interest exercise still operating? This was when across Whitehall departments were asked to identify areas of research questions they had that were relevant, and I think they came up with several hundred, quite a lot in the social sciences. Is that exercise still alive? Is it refreshed? Is it shaping what UKRI did?
It's absolutely still alive, and ESRC did a lot of work to put all those things together into a database that researchers could access, and also to help departments to articulate them in a way that made them easier more relevant for researchers. And then there are these policy fellows with this very active policy fellowship program putting researchers into departments, which also supports that activity. So all of those things are growing, I think, in a very positive way. Then
physics.
Could move on to the real risk, I think, that unless the way that the kind of consolidation process rippling through the university sector, unless that process can happen in a coordinated way, then I think we are in significant danger of a load of independent unilateral decisions accidentally resulting in massive holes in our national capability. And I think that's a real problem and absolutely feeds into a lot of those other things I was talking about earlier, that an incentive system which allows collaboration across universities and supports strategic decision making that is long-term, collectively as well as individually. I think that's critical, and there's lots of opportunity to do that. Never waste a good crisis, but the trouble with the good crisis is things are happening so quickly that there is a risk that we will waste a good crisis. we need to lean into that.
Yeah. Let's get Gavin a report. What the questions that are coming in online? Any themes emerging?
Yeah, so there's lots of interesting questions online. If I give you the two most upvoted questions and see how you go. The first one says, let's talk about the United States. There seems to have been a complete fracturing of trust between politicians and scientists. Is the UK immune, or will the same happen here? And then a very different question. What is your view on the relationship of UKRI with DCIT, and how could the two organisations work better together?
Right.
Thank you. Okay, so US. I think a better way to frame that perhaps is populism. In that, the situation in the US and the relationship between the US government and science is actually about populism. And it's not so much that there's a sort of anti-science move going on or a trust gap with science going on. It's that the whole narrative is a divide and conquer narrative. It's about, there are bad guys over there and good guys over here. And academia in particular is a strong target in the current iteration of populist debate. They are the elite against which it's easy to build a case and then build a vote, a popular vote. And there's a whole variety of reasons for that. One of which is something that bothers me a lot, which is the extent to which the research system, particularly in academia, has become an elitist activity. It's shiny lab coats and shiny equipment done by very clever people over there, and it's not normal. It's not something that people can relate to. And then when those academic institutions are also full of people who are quite often at the vanguard of some of the kind of social changes that people don't like, it creates an opportunity for them to be drawn into populist narratives. An important response to that is not to say, oh no, science is under attack, we must fight back, because that just marches up to the battle line that's been drawn. We need to say, why is it that this, really core activity for humanity can be used in that way in a political debate? And what do we need to do as a community to take down those barriers and ensure that everybody feels that science belongs to them and therefore it can't be politicized in that kind of way? So I think it's incumbent on the entire research community in the US, but also internationally, to fling open the lab doors and welcome everybody in, to ask people what they care about and to learn from people. It's not, oh no, people don't understand science, we have to teach them. We don't understand people because clearly there's a big understanding gap going on. We need to talk to people and understand what they care about. And we need to learn from people. And that's a global priority at the moment, I think. And it is not just about the US, it is about everywhere, and you can see it happening everywhere. And it's important, or we lose the very tools that we need to get us through this very difficult time. It's a difficult time in world history. Things are changing really fast, and that makes people anxious, which is why it's possible to drive those populist debates. That was question one. What was question two?
The DCIT UKRI relationship.
DCIT UKRI relationship. Yes. So sitting next to David here, where responsibility for science sits in government has been a matter of continuous evolution over a very long period of time. Is it with education? Is it with business? Is it with and to me, there's a certain logic in having it just all by itself, interacting with everything because it does. I mean, there are challenges as well, but there's some benefit to that and some real recognition that the huge challenges facing the UK, and we're in this massive debt trap. Almost the only way out of it is through innovation, through science, technology, innovation, and we've got to put that, properly front and center and integrated across everything that we do to generate the high productivity jobs and the high productivity public services that allow us to fund the public services that we need to ensure that people are thriving and happy and healthy so that they can contribute. I mean, it's a deeply interconnected thing, and unless we could get those connections right, we're in big trouble, and I think DSIT is important in doing that. And the relationship with UKRI, you know, it's our, I'm still, look, I refer to it as us. It's the UKRI sponsoring department, and it's a very close and very important relationship. And that gets back a little bit to when we were talking about the Haldane principle, building a trusting relationship with ministers in that department to so that ministers can be confident that their priorities are being heard and delivered, but they don't need to be down in the weeds of the detailed mechanisms of how they're being delivered. That's the opportunity going forward, and I think it was happening, and in a good way, I think, and obviously very much helped by having Patrick as the minister, because he totally gets it. So it's much easier to work with somebody has quite such a lot of expertise themselves.
I mean, you could argue that the UKRI, the creation of DSIT makes the UKRI position a little bit trickier, because ministers, once you've got your science department, ministers with a relatively small budget, in Whitehall terms, ministers turn up and find that over 50% of this budget goes for one entity, UKRI, that's at arm's length. And of course, the original Paul Nurse report was basically saying science is too important to be trusted to politicians, and science ministers come and go, and we never know, they may have eccentric ideas. So there is formulating that relationship between a set of ministers who think science is what they're there for, and this great big arm's length body has been tricky. Do you think that when you say Patrick gets it, Patrick, of course, does know a hell of a lot of science. Mm-hmm. And in a way, that gives him, if Patrick's views on life sciences matter and should command far more weight than my views on life sciences would have done 15 years ago. I mean, so how, when you say he gets it, that's a good thing, is it?
So it's a very good thing that he gets it, but it's not just he knows a lot of science, he gets how the system works. That's the important thing. So, for example, the fact that most of the research grants that UKRI give out are 3, 4, 5-year grants means that the amount of money that is actually free out of the annual budget. So, there's this fundamental mismatch which a lot of people in the academic community don't get, which is budgets in government are very strictly annual. You cannot carry money over from one year to the next. You've got your annual budget, you're spending it in year, and there you go. But most of the grants we give out are multi-year grants, and so you're essentially committing money at risk into future years. And it means at the beginning of every year, the vast majority of your budget is already committed, because even the stuff that isn't already in an active grant, it takes at least 6 months to get the list of awarded grants sorted out from the competition. Blah, blah, blah. So from the point of view of a minister coming in, looking at £9 billion, they think, oh, that's fine, I've got £9 billion to spend. And then you tell them it's not even that they can't sensibly manipulate, it's actually a huge kind of rolling window of spend on this massive, quite difficult to understand and get your head around portfolio. And the job, really, of the Chief Executive of UKRI is to find ways to articulate the extraordinary power of that rolling portfolio in allowing ministers to deliver their outcomes, the outcomes they want to deliver, in a way that does not involve scooping money into a pot with a label on top. Yeah. And it's not just the ministers as well, it's actually the civil servants around that, because it's just so tempting to say, I want this outcome, therefore I need this pot of money, and there's a chain of events, linear input, output stuff. And it just doesn't work that way. And I hope that if we get some stability around the existence of DCIT and the existence of UKRI over a period of time, that learning how it works and how incredibly powerful it is at delivering policy will allow exactly this sort of risk to be mitigated.
Jam jars are a
Jars.
total nightmare. I think at one point we counted 27 different jam jars. There were pots of money that had a specific amount of money to be allocated for a specific purpose, and it makes it very hard to do the big stuff.
Yeah.
Let's collect some more interventions from here in the room before I go back to Gavin. Yes, so shall we, why don't we work up through the lady in blue? Let's walk at the central passageway, okay? We haven't got them. Where's them? Ah, sorry, the microphone is over there. All right, I apologise. I've sent you. Let's. Thank you, Gavin. Yeah, and then we can work at the passageway. Yeah.
I wonder if you could indulge me with a bit of a thank you to Dame Ottoline, as well as a small question.
Definitely go for the question. Yeah.
I welcome
So the thank you is, I'm a previous Future Leaders Fellow, an UKRI Future Leaders Fellow, and I just wanted to highlight, so as someone who's come through UKRI over the last sort of 4 to 5 years and seen how the organization has evolved, I just wanted to take this time to say thank you so very much for your leadership style, because it has been visible, inspirational, and engaging. And I remember the first time, just a little anecdote, the first time as a Future Leader Fellow, a couple of us were gathered and we were shoveled into a room to have a round table with yourself, and we were all very nervous. It's the CEO of UKRI. And you were just, instead of this imposing figure, you engaged us, you listened to us, you made us felt seen and heard, and you discussed many topics which many people, I would say, would have shied away from. And so thank you so much for that. That was so incredibly inspirational. And I think I speak on behalf of other FLFs as well, of what the leadership that you have demonstrated throughout your tenure has been so inspirational and ignited something that hopefully in the few years and decades, we'll get to see. So thank you.
Very good.
Thank you. That's so kind and super generous. That really means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah. Oh, we've got a really difficult question.
No. I promise it isn't. So again, as someone who also doesn't like complaining about things, what are some of the things that you wish businesses would do better, or maybe proactively, to be better sort of integrated into the ecosystem?
Right, and what I'm going to do, because we are now getting a bit tight, we're going to collect several questions. There's a whole group we're a bit behind.
I missed the beginning of that question. What would I do differently? What
are some of the things you wish that businesses would do differently?
Businesses would do differently.
Right.
Okay, very good.
Right. So let's carry on. I'm going to keep a lot of questions now, but keep them all short. And Air2 have been a fantastic sponsor of this. At the end, I will thank Air2, but over to you, Jane.
Thank you. Jane Gate from Air2. So what do you think we need to be doing, not just UKRI, but collectively as a research community, to really start to properly rebuild our collaborations in Europe?
Right.
Now that it's nearly a year since we've reassociated and still not quite where we were before.
Okay, very good question. There, yep.
David Kingham from Tokamak Energy. We're a fusion energy technology development business and a superconducting magnets business. And I would also like to know how business can best engage with UKRI. We have had some great successes like Future Leaders Fellowship, but I think there's more we could do.
Right, interesting. Keep on going past yes, that's right, in the middle, there, lady there, yeah.
Hi, Hannah Russell from the British Science Association. I wanted to... Oh, I don't know if that's still
fine.
working. I wanted to build on the populism question. Ottoline, you've always been a huge advocate for public engagement, for which we're very grateful. And I just... would be great to get your vision for what a healthy relationship between the public and the research and innovation ecosystem looks like, And what's the role of UKRI in helping to realise that?
Great. And was there another question nearby? Yes, gentleman there. Yep.
John Lowe, working for a company of engineers, IMECE and some various other bodies. Question for the top and bottom of your brief, Ottoline. One is, what do we do to ensure that small companies manage to grow in this country and not be sold to overseas like USA? Secondly, what do you do to encourage young people into STEM?
Right. Yes, and I think let's add on those bunch at the back, and then we've got a really If I'm okay, I hope that was sufficiently respectful. I hope that wasn't meant to.
Are you keeping a note of these?
Yes, I am.
I will completely have forgotten the first one. By the time
we're going to have a
Hi, Seb Jana, Institute of Physics and Engineering in Medicine. You've talked a lot about the diversity of the kind of university scene. I suppose the other end of that is university spin-outs. They're still quite concentrated in London and the southeast, and more than 50% come from 10 institutions. I wondered what role UKRI has to play in kind of driving spin-outs to be more diverse geographically.
Right, and behind you.
Thank you. Eamon Guilford, Prospect Trade Union. Perhaps a gentle challenge, full economic costing. Is it right in an environment where universities are financially strained and the public sector purse is quite narrow that UKRI continues to request that 20% of all grants be funded by the bodies that receive them? Is that a model that can continue to persist, noting the Nurse Review in 2023 proposed alternative arrangements for funding? Thank you.
Right, and then, yes, question there.
Thank you. Rory Daniels, Tech UK, I lead emerging tech. Dame Ottoline, I loved your quote, "We're in a massive debt trap and almost the only way out of it is through science and innovation." I guess maybe the missing word is commercialisation. Can you speak to what UKRI could do to drive that and address the valley of death?
Well, you see, this is very interesting. There is a strong theme here. A lot of the questions. Now, we will go to the other questions later, but there is a strong business, small business, spin-outs, commercialisation theme.
Yep.
Why don't you tackle that?
Yep. Actually, before I do, I might just leap in on the full economic cost, because we did cover that earlier. UKRI puts in 64p in the pound, not 20p, 64p for every one of those grants that goes in. So it is not the case that the public funding doesn't make 100% of full economic cost. The financial crisis in universities is much, much more complicated than that, and we've talked about that already. Businesses, yes. Large, small, and everywhere in between. So, we have a very vibrant spin-out system in the UK. I don't know the data on the exact numbers of exactly where all the spin-outs happen, but there are a lot of spin-outs outside the Golden Triangle. There is less venture capital in those areas to keep them going much after the initial spin-out, let alone across the Valley of Death. So that maps onto this broader question of capital at different points in the industrial journey, from start-outs or spin-outs through to scale-ups and bigger. And there are clearly a lot of challenges with the capital situation in the UK, let's say, both its geographical distribution and long-term patient capital and so on and so forth. And there's a huge amount of work and thought that has gone on across this, and various initiatives to try to address it. Kind of patient capital in the big asset managers and so on and so forth. And it's good that all of that work is happening. I have been wondering for quite a long time whether a lot of the challenges we have with balkanisation, with these silos, are also underpinning a lot of that, those issues, because we don't have the research and innovation expertise in the big asset managers, for example. We don't have enough venture capital activity that knows and loves and understands and is keen on investing in research and innovation. And partly, I think that's because those communities are too segregated from the research and innovation system. And if we had much more dynamic careers with people moving much more across them, between them and through them, then it would join up much more straightforwardly and people would know people. So much of this stuff is about networks, the networks of people you know, and if people go to university and never leave, then nobody knows anybody, and that won't do. So we need to have way more dynamic interaction of people going to university, leaving university, coming back to university, not going to university, later coming into university, and so on and so forth, and round. And I think if we can join the system up much more in that way, that's key, and that's one of the main drivers for changing the way we do CVs and those kinds of things. It's the kinds of systems change that needs to happen will require those multiple small interventions that shift incentives, change behaviours, and help build the kind of ecosystem that we need. And it's another reason why UKRI is such an important organisation, because it sits at that junction. And what can businesses do to help that? I guess the more people can articulate that people moving is so important in all directions, the better. And there are so many ways. It's building those networks takes time, and time is actually the thing people have least of. And so one of the things I deeply appreciated at UKRI was the small business people willing to spend any time at all in helping, because it's very difficult to get the voice of really small businesses. It's very easy to get big businesses, and what they care about and their priorities are actually very different from a very complex and dynamic set of very small businesses. So getting that voice in, I think, is key.
And then there were two other questions, the European angle and also a bit more on populism.
Yeah. So the European angle, it's interesting again in that the rebuilding of success in Horizon Europe has been reasonably straightforward across the university system and much more challenging in the business sector. And there are a number of reasons for that. Some of them to do with exactly which bits of the European innovation funding we associated with and the bits we didn't, which have, I think, created challenges for businesses. And because of that, the success rates are very low, and if success rates are very low, businesses don't want to invest the time in applying. And so you get into a vicious cycle. And absolutely, whatever we can do to support businesses to put those applications in, the better, because the vicious cycle is not going to end well, because there will need to be another association decision in less time than you think. So it's important. And if businesses, I think if businesses want particular things in order to help them with that, articulating what would help, I think, is also a very useful thing for businesses to do.
The British Science Association, understandably, asking a bit more about what more can be done in practice to engage with populist concerns and pressures.
Oh, absolutely. So I think, this is really a thing that is the kind of big focus for me over the next few years, is how we change how people even think about science. We live in a world where people, it's a matter of their personal identity. You're a scientist, or you're definitely not a scientist. I think anyone who's ever been a scientist has had that conversation at a party where you you're doing the small talk, and someone says, "What do you do?" and you say, "I'm a scientist," and you get this very peculiar reaction where people say, "Oh, that was far too difficult for me at school. I don't know anything about it at all. You must be very clever." And then either they go and talk to someone else, or it's
they go and find an accountant to talk to.
Obligatory to talk about the weather or where you went on holiday. It's a hard divide between scientists and not scientists, and that is ridiculous. It needs to go, and that requires the scientists at least as much, if not more, to let go of their special identity as scientists, as it does for people who are currently not scientists to embrace the idea that maybe they are, because everybody's a scientist. Your 2-year-old is a scientist. You watch them doing the science on your living room floor. What's this? How does it work? What would happen if I bashed it up and down? How can I make it do something useful over here? I mean, it's science. It's a very human thing, and we have turned it into this very peculiar specialist activity that goes on in mysterious places over there. And until we get rid of that, we will never have the kind of opportunity for science to transform how our culture works in a way that it can. Not science as in a shiny thing you discovered using science, but the process of science, which is about hope and empowerment and ability to fix your problems and all kinds of things that we badly need to be everywhere now. A lot of where populism comes from is from, anxiety about the future, feelings of loss of control and loss of things that matter to you, and inequality. And whilst you can pitch a story that there are people over there who have everything and are in charge of everything and are secretly doing scary things that are coming to get you, then you'll be able to drive that divide. But when we get back to the place where everybody owns science, it belongs to all of us because it's so human, then you will no longer be able to use it as a divisive war in a populist debate. And indeed, beyond that, it's strong protection against divide and conquer narratives, because that notion of powerlessness is undermined by the idea that you, as an individual, have problem-solving skills and can do something about the things that you're unhappy about. I obviously feel rather passionately about this. We need to fix it, and I do think UKRI has an important role to play in that. And some of the things we did, working with the Young Foundation to support community-led research, for example, that really puts the power in the hands of people to address the problems that they care about.
I think that was a fantastic answer, and thanks so much for the question. It was a wonderful note on which to end. I love the idea of the 2-year-old doing science. As the grandfather of a 2-year-old, I now understand far better what he's up to, and that was a great note on which to end. Thank you so much, Ottoline. Thank you for being with us this evening. Thank you, too, for your service at UKRI. And I think it was great to have an endorsement of your approach to leadership. And as I said earlier, I did see in areas like the importance of interdisciplinary working, your ability to take people from a range of backgrounds with a range of prior assumptions about what was valuable, to bring them together, I think was conspicuous and of great public service.
Thank you.
So thank you for what you've done, Ottoline. Thank you to you guys, everybody, for participating. Particular thanks to Air2 for your sponsorship. We do appreciate our partnership with Air2. Our next events, we're out in Belfast on the 22nd of October for an event on AI and the future of work. And on the 12th of November, we are having a discussion which becomes increasingly topical, a debate on the future of the UK life sciences. That'll be on the 12th of November in London. We aim actually to be out in West London at the new ARC Centre there. So now for people here in the hall, I'm sorry we have to say farewell to the online participants, but if people want to have a stay for a glass of wine, you're very welcome. And Ottoline, thank you very much for this evening. Thank you.